Hello.
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 Welcome to our impactful discussion of the week. My name is Belle. I use she, they pronouns.
My name is Xavier. I use they, them pronouns.
My name is Maeve. I use she, her pronouns.
And my name is AJ, and I use she, her pronouns, and we are very impactful people.
Something like that. So this week we'll be discussing two films. Get two for the price of one, or just extra work for us. So we will be doing both Sunset Boulevard and Gaslight.
And Sunset Boulevard is a movie focusing on Joe Gillis, a struggling hack Hollywood screenwriter who falls into a tentative creative partnership with forgotten silent film star Norma Desmond, whose dream is to play Salome on the silver screen. At first, Gillis sees Desmond as an easy source of income while he plays along with her fantasies of returning to the silver screen, but as he stays longer, the depths of her delusion are discovered. Directed by Billy Wilder and released in 1950. Characters are Norma Desmond, played by Gloria Swanson, Joe Gillis, which is William Holden, Betty Schaefer, which is Nancy Olson, and Max von Merling, which is Eric von Stroheim. I hope that Stroheim, I think.
Stroheim. Seems right.
Yeah.
And our second film is Gaslight, directed by George Cukor in 1944. And it's the story of a young woman who returns with her new fiance to her aunt's house, where her aunt was murdered about 10 years prior. And they set up and seem to be having a happy life. And then Paula starts to notice some strange inconsistencies happening around the house. She thinks she's seeing things, and she's led to question her sanity. So we have Paula Alquist, who's played by Ingrid Bergman. We have Gregory Anton, the weird, spooky gaslighting husband, played by Charles Boyer. Brian Cameron, who's sort of a police investigator guy who comes in and saves the day, played by Joseph Cotton. And Nancy Oliver, she's a housemaid, not as important. That's Angela Lansbury. And Miss Bessie, who is a nice little neighbor lady who tends to the garden, played by Mae Woody.
All right. And yeah, so this week we are each going to be giving you an example or two of how Gaslight really demonstrates that this Gothic genre sort of forecasted the structures that we're going to be seeing later in film noir. And then also we're going to give some examples of how Sunset Boulevard is really conscious of this fact and does borrow a lot from the Gothic genre, because Wilder really understands that noir was partly formed by it. So yeah.
And so first there's a couple just very broad aspects of the Gothic as represented in Gaslight, which have been seen quite a bit in the films that we've watched. A couple more specific examples, but basically in Gaslight, as the title suggests, there's a lot of gaslighting going on. So Gregory is lying to Paula. He is taking down the items and saying, well, where did that go? You took that. I don't remember that, but okay, I guess I'm insane now. So he is convincing, he's making her do all the work in convincing herself that she's insane in her own mind. He's doing some physical stuff, but just the idea of always lying, never being able to trust anyone, is very, very prominent in noir. There's so much backstabbing. There's so much, are they actually in on this? Who's in on what? How many steps ahead is this character? And you just really don't know. In a specific example, the specifics that Gregory's doing, he is moving around stuff and telling her that she's doing it, so convincing herself that she's insane and incriminating herself so that he then gets power of attorney so that he can get the inheritance and the jewels. Like we saw in Tension, the detective lies to the femme fatale character. All this stuff was moved around, so we know you planted that gun. When in reality, he didn't do that. He was just lying to her, because if she was innocent, she would have kept insisting. But since she wasn't, she just was bad. She just immediately gave up because she thought, oh, well, they know now, even though he didn't.
Yeah, and
He
he was
just
like, it
was
would have
very
been too much
clever.
work to
Yeah.
actually do it. I just needed to make her think we did it.
Too much work. Well, that's a very broad thing. Just the lying and the double crossing, the back and forth, the not being sure who knows what, which is very prominent in noir. It sort of related to that, just the fact that the story direction is not very clear. Like, you don't really know where everything is going. In the film that we watched recently, the Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, it takes several turns. Like, it starts off as a political exposure noir thing, then it turns into a rush for innocence, and it doesn't even seem that noir anymore. And then in the end, it goes back and says, by the way, do you remember that girl who was murdered? This that we were faking the murderer the whole time. He actually was the real murderer. But you've forgotten that was something you needed to think about, was who did murder this girl. And in this one, we've kind of forgotten in Gaslight, who did murder that aunt? There's got to be a connection. I mean, she's going back to the house. Something's going to happen. Otherwise, this is going to be boring. So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, not much
either
movie if you don't do that.
yeah, they go back, they have kids and live a happy life.
Yeah.
That's boring. I'm happy for them, but that's boring. And so either the ghost of someone has to come back and haunt her, or the killer, who we find out later is Gregory, needs to gaslight her the entire time and switch up the story. Because at first it's like she's going back, she's confronting her past, it's kind of making her go crazy. Wait, actually, it's her husband who's making her go crazy. And remember from before, he's actually that killer. Very much going around and being just confusing, but in a good way, in a way that makes you go, oh, I see, I get it now, which is very noir.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that she suspects like her own sanity over like it being possibly like him, and even some like rational explanations like, oh, it's like fluctuations in gaslight of the gas. You know, she applies it to herself partially because her husband is like telling her that she's crazy, so she believes that rather than suspect the husband. But I think in a way it's Paula who's the unsuspecting person, because she fails to suspect that there could be something suspicious going on with her husband. She just thinks, oh yeah, I must be crazy. Surely it's got to be my problem, not his problem.
Yeah, I feel like something that really speaks to that is like when she kind of really starts to feel like she's going crazy, and she voices it very well after like she loses the brooch, and he totally sets her up for that. And then she goes, suddenly I am beginning not to trust my memory at all. And I think like, yeah, that paranoia that's turning inwards instead of like outwards towards the whole world and like criminality and stuff is like very gothic.
He also makes her think that she does have full control. Like when Bessie comes to visit and he tells the maid she's not available now, and Paula goes, but I kind of want to see her. She's not available. But then right after says, well, if you wanted to see her, you should have just said so. And like, you just told her. But since he's played such an amazing character, obviously she has fallen so in love with him. He's playing the long con. She's so entrapped in this relationship that she believes is real. She's so deep in that she can't, there's no way this can be fake. And so she can't step back and see the bigger picture, because that's the logical explanation is, well, he's telling me that I took it off. I don't remember him doing it, and he's doing this a lot. I think he's just lying, but she just doesn't have that perspective because he's kind of a psycho and has been playing her this whole time and is good at playing her.
And if you think about it, like he did it so fast and so effectively, like by the time, like, I don't know, their romance was not very long. And by the time they like, right? Like they,
Yeah, it was like 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
yeah,
Yeah.
a real whirlwind romance. And so like he very quickly and very effectively set himself up as the person she needed to depend on for the truth, for comfort, for safety from like others and herself. And he just like it's like, I don't know, it's just crazy how effectively he was able to turn her completely against everything that she's always known.
Trick of the sociopath, which is also a trope of noir. He's kind of like what would be the male version of a femme fatale?
Just a guy.
Man,
Just a dude.
fatale.
Dude.
Dude fatale. Bro fatale.
Yeah.
Mr. Fatale.
Yeah, because he's kind of like Phyllis Dietrichson. He's kind of playing that role with the whole thing. Like he was planning this thing the whole time and faked being in love. She thought that she was in on it, which was she didn't think there was something to be in on. It's just a romance. But he is the dude fatale. Trademark
Dude
VIP.
fatale, trademark from V.I.P.s. Yeah. Yes, that's our first album.
There
Mm-hmm. So that's the basic how Gaslight has inspired noir. Another broad way of how Sunset Boulevard shows how it was inspired by the Gothic and sort of a blend of the Gothic noir. So it starts like a classic setup to noir, and the exact same as two that we've seen in Double Indemnity and Murder My Sweet. They both start at the end of the film, and it's told in retrospect, the character narrating. But it immediately takes the Gothic turn when you realize, oh, the dead body is narrating, which is just creepy. It's creepy. When you figure out, I don't think he ever says, when the thing comes up, you want to hear that 90s thing of, yep, that's me. You're probably
right.
Record scratch.
Yeah. He doesn't do that, which obviously he wouldn't because that's stupid. But it's kind of like that feeling and that creepy, like, oh God, a dead guy's talking to me right now.
I think it's like a post-mortem narration.
Yeah.
That's what I came up with.
Yes.
Beyond the grave, telling us what happened.
Yeah. So that's the setup of typical noir, takes the Gothic turn. And then right after that, similar thing. He's a down on his luck hack writer who needs money now, getting chased by some repossession guys, which very noir. They're all wearing fedoras. And then literally takes a sharp, trying to remember, right turn, I believe it was right turn, into Gothic. As soon as that house comes into the picture, as soon as Max steps in, because Max looks like Fester from the Addams Family.
Oh yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. As soon as he just sort of is standing in the door. No, I'm going back. I go back another couple seconds. As soon as you see Norma just sort of staring at him through the curtains, like she knew he was there the whole time. And then you look, Max is there the whole time. What the heck? And you enter into the house. You enter into this Gothic monkey funeral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So jarring.
So jarring.
So jarring.
Yeah.
It's
like you
and
it's like you turn off into this weird isolated mansion that's kind of, getting into that Gothic isolation away from other things where like weird mysterious things happen. You have this dead monkey and a guy is supposed to be coming by with a casket, and instead, you know, you get our main guy, our main man, sorry I forgot his name, Joe. Yeah, you get him and he comes in and he, you know, witnesses sort of whatever this weird ass situation's going on. You got this like rich lady and then you have this dead monkey. And one thing that I kind of just thought about was the monkey was like her pet, and then he comes in and he ends up being like wrapped into this world of like Norma's world, and he becomes like the next pet. So they buried the monkey like later, and he's like watching that because his car broke down and he has to stay overnight. So they bury the monkey, and then like the next day all of his stuff has been moved into the apartment and he has become the new thing. He's the new monkey
in his little cage.
Yeah.
above the garage.
And when they take the monkey out, they're taking him towards the pool, which is
Mm.
where he eventually ends up.
Yeah, they all end up
Cool.
in the graveyard near the pool, I guess.
How did the monkey die? Did Norma kill him because he did something? I don't know.
Well, he
threw
didn't
poop at
want to
her?
write the screenplay to Salome. That was it.
Yeah.
Gonna do the thing where the monkey types out Shakespeare inevitably, but it didn't work
Yeah.
out.
Oh, that's who wrote the script, was the monkey.
Right.
That's why it made no
Yeah, that's why
sense.
it was so crazy.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, that like, and that is pretty terrifying, and that is very gothic. It really reminds me of that episode of The Twilight Zone, which is like classic gothic stuff, where the little boy is omnipotent or omniscient. I'm forgetting which one means you can do everything, and he keeps his family basically as his playthings.
Mm-hmm.
And to be trapped by someone who's insane, Norma's pretty psychotic, who has all the power. She's got all the money, she's got all the power. Who's going to believe him if he says that she's, you know, crazy, she's famous?
Yeah.
And it's just terrifying.
I also think it's interesting in the beginning that he was like so happy with himself for having
Yeah.
gotten invited to stay the night, so he didn't have to like go back and like get caught with the car and everything. And then he like quickly realizes that it's like way too creepy.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
like in the beginning there was like she didn't even want him there, and he was like, no, like I'm a writer, and she was like, oh, you're a writer, come back.
And you're
Yeah.
Sagittarius?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh god.
And so she like draws him in, and then there's no escaping.
Well,
Like he could have gotten out, but
you
then
you see for like a second that he's like, okay, maybe this is good when they're going out to get him new clothes, and she's like, which one of these jackets? He's like, I'm gonna take the less expensive one, and then the clerk is like,
That creepy
you
ass
could
clerk.
just get the richer one. Like,
If she's paying.
yeah, like
Yeah.
who cares?
He
Might
looks
as
like
well.
Joan Waters, that
Yeah,
clerk.
he did look like John Waters. But
Oh,
that's
gosh.
like the last time where he's like, oh, this is good. And then it turns to shit right after that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think the noir audience kind of has a similar fascination that Joe initially has with kind of like you know, ooh, there's some like weird situation going on, maybe it's like criminal, and I think noir film viewers enjoy the kind of weird perverse aspects of like this relationship that could possibly exist between the two of them, and like, you know, what does she want from him, what does he want from her? I mean, like money. And I think there's a interesting kind of connection with Gaslight, which has this obsession with crime and criminality. I wouldn't necessarily say it was like a true crime obsession, although there is an aspect of that in like the newspapers that tell the story of the aunt's murder. But I was thinking specifically of when Miss Bessie, aka Bloodthirsty Bessie, as she's called by her brother, she's reading a book on the train, and it's, I'm assuming, some kind of like crime novel, not necessarily true crime. And she's laughing while she's reading it, and Paula looks over and she's kind of wondering what's up. And, Bessie says, I'm afraid I enjoy a good murder now and then, which is, I think, kind of the same mindset that the noir audience has towards noir films. Like, you want to see the crime from the inside. You want to see bad people doing bad things and sort of getting away with it. You want to see crimes happening like right next door. It could happen anywhere. Like, that's weirdly enjoyable, I think, to people, to think about the possibility that these things exist in real life, and they exist like right under your nose.
Right there.
Mhm. Yeah, and even like Miss Bessie says, she's like pretty deep into the lore of this murder at 9 Thornton Square. She's like, no, we had a real live murder there. And then she also says, I'll point out the window of the room in number 9 where it happened. So she knows like where it happened, when it happened, like who was sort of there. She knows everything that there is to know, other than like having the police case files in front of her. Which there'd be obviously certain things that she didn't know, but she's been like trying to physically get inside that house and like see the murder house, which is kind of like how, people have weird fascinations with like going to places where like people have died, or like a haunted house type situation. I think it's that same sort of fascination.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's also a line where at the beginning of Gaslight, Paula is being led out of the house by this kind of, I don't know if it's her uncle or some sort of family friend, but he says a line that I think this also connects back briefly to what Maeve said. And he says, you must think of the future, dear, not the past, which pretty much is a clear foreshadow of like, hey, something from the past is going to come back to haunt you. And that happens very often in film noir. I'm just thinking of this is not going to be relatable unless you've seen Orson Welles' The Stranger, but basically he plays this guy, Franz Kindler, who is like a Nazi criminal, and he's hiding away in like Connecticut with a new identity. He's constantly afraid of like someone from his past coming to find him. And, that is like a very classic noir type film. So it's definitely a trope that is pretty pervasive throughout the noir genre. And I think it was interesting that this quote was kind of in this Gothic film. And then ultimately, the past does come back to haunt her, but she wasn't even really aware that that could be a possibility. And I think that people in noir are often like trapped in like a past present world where they like can't escape their past, or like the future is clouded / like haunted by who they used to be, which I think is very much true in Sunset Boulevard, where we have Norma, who's unwilling to let her past, to escape her past. She wants to live in the glory days of who she used to be, which is kind of like Miss Bessie's fascination with the murder that took place 10 years ago. Norma is obsessed with, this past that she used to live, and she wants to live out that past like in the present.
No, she shouldn't do. It's literally like that. I believe it was the 3rd film we watched, Out of the Past, which
yes,
it was the opposite, where he was trying to go forward with it because he had to. But in this one, that's kind of the Gothic spin, is living in the past, because it's natural to want to move forward. But in this one, the line, Norma, there's nothing wrong with being 50 unless you're
trying to act like you're 25.
Yeah. Which is what she's doing.
Also,
so creepy.
I know. I also think it's interesting that a lot of Gothics are set literally in the past. Like, I think the newspaper on Gaslight said like 1875 in that little clip they showed.
Yeah.
And so I think that's interesting. Like, it's kind of trying to pull us all back to a different time. And then like Norma is obviously like living that concept.
She takes it to another level.
Yeah, she does. And yeah, so I feel like that paranoia that we kind of have been talking about is really prevalent in both noir and Gothic stuff. Like, how Paula starts to say that she doesn't trust her memory, and like everything in her whole world stops making sense really because she doesn't trust her own brain. And she also like flat out says she's scared of the house. She doesn't trust the environment she's living in. Everything that's happening started happening when she started living in that house. So while all of this paranoia is focused like very internally in Gothic, I feel like that sort of leads to the later portrayal of paranoia in noir, which is like super external almost, in that like you're afraid maybe of everyone and everything all the time. Anyone could be doing any crime, no matter where you are. Um, and
It's
yeah, so that I think on a very basic level, that paranoia is there, but it's like developed in noir, so that it can really more effectively communicate general paranoia to the audience itself.
yeah. It's
You
like that. It's like the inward paranoia turned outward to everyone around you, and
yeah,
assuming that everyone around you is intentionally screwing you over, doing things to like mess you up, kind of rather than I don't. There's probably examples in film noir where it's more internal, but it's generally like the external world is
yeah,
up to
like
no
you're
good.
on your own, you can't trust anyone.
Hmm.
Whereas like in Gaslight, like Paula is convinced that her husband is the only one that she can trust, where he's
Hmm.
like the one doing it to her, but like she trusts him at sometimes more than she trusts her own memory, and like her own knowledge of what's going on. Whereas like I feel like in noir sometimes like the protagonist really they might trust a femme fatale, but it never ends well. And like a lot of the time, the people that you would think they would trust, there's certain reasons that they can't, like police and things like that.
Mm. Yeah, I
Um,
think film noir is like against trusting other people because
Yeah.
of the way that it always shows, like, if you trust the femme fatale, this is what's going to happen.
yeah,
And then with Gothic, you have kind of a slightly not as deeply formed example of that in Gaslight, where it's like, we have this woman, she kind of trusts her husband, and fair enough, I guess it's your husband, but
for how
it
long?
Too
doesn't.
much.
Yeah, too much trust, and he's actually the one being bad, and noir just assumes that everyone is bad all the time, and this is why you can't trust anyone, and you're probably going to die if you do.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and there I feel like there are definitely moments where a noir protagonist feels like they can't trust what they know, but it's less like I saw what I saw and I don't believe that I saw it, and it's more like
Mhm.
I don't know, there's too many stories being told and I don't know which is the truth, you know?
Yeah, it's
Um
that, like, they know, the only thing they know is that they don't know what they
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and so I also think there's like a big overlap in the dynamic of like imprisonment, specifically with Sunset Boulevard, less with general film noir. But in Boulevard, I feel like it's like at first glance, it's pretty obvious that you feel like Joe is being trapped by Norma. And he is like on a very basic level, like she doesn't let him go places, like
Brings her
there's no locks
Mhm.
on the doors, he can't have privacy. But at the same time, I feel like in a gothic film, the captor is playing tricks on the person who is being held prisoner, and they hold all of the power. But it's I think it's just kind of Boulevard flips it on its head a little, and says like Norma has the power in some ways in this dynamic, but she also is not in control of her own mind, and she is being held captive by herself.
Mhm.
And then she also needs, like, she feels a great need to bring people into her fantasy that she's living.
More
Um,
like her delusion.
Yeah.
yeah. Like her complete dream state that she's just suspended in all of the time. And so obviously Max is like the biggest enabler in the whole world ever. And and so yeah, she can't handle the truth. She doesn't want to know the truth. So like in a sense that paranoia is like a little less present because she honestly doesn't want to figure out if her anxieties are real.
Yeah,
Uh,
she's
Mhm.
very content with her delusion and
yeah,
actively, like, whether she knows that it's not reality or not, she is still trying to make it reality with the script and the way she's acting and all her procedures.
and
Uh,
like I think like to start she was extremely paranoid, but her and Max have built up this world where both of them truly believe and like maintain that she is the star that she always was.
right. I
And
mean,
so
he
like
literally writes her fan letters.
yeah,
Mhm.
and he's like
Like,
sometimes she got 14,000 in a week, like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's just so intense. And so yeah, at one point Joe asks Max what happens when she finds out, and he says she never will. That's my job, as it has been for a long time. So yeah,
This is
um
sad.
Yeah.
I
He's
know.
got
And
such a sad
Mm.
existence.
yeah,
He's
and so,
seen
yeah,
like two other husbands too, because he was the first husband.
Yeah,
He's
he's
lived through that.
just
horrible.
coasting by.
And
Yeah.
like the way that he looks at Norma looking at Joe is just like when like once you find out like that he was the first husband, going back to all of the scenes where you watch him watch them, it's like
Mm.
so painful.
Right.
So painful. So yeah, Norma kind of like really creates an emotional barrier to the truth, I feel like, for Joe. And he can't figure out what's real because it's all coming from her mind, everything that she's like built up to be her life that isn't her life.
Mhm.
Whereas like in like a more typical noir, I feel like a lot of times there's more of a I don't want to say tangible, it's not a tangible barrier, but less of an emotional barrier and more of a barrier that's caused by criminal activity, like outright criminal activity, uh,
Mm.
and people like hiding the truth in a malicious way, which I think it's much more complex in Sunset Boulevard, and I think that's why it's so gothic.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mm.
because like you said, with there's still a level of paranoia, but it's turned inwards and also outwards. um, not just the latter, like in noir. But I think it's interesting that both of the characters in both films that are being manipulated and getting this delusion created for them are connected in a pretty deep way. I mean, they're both high class individuals that are connected to the arts, which to me like is pretty gothic. Um, Paula is a training opera singer, and her aunt was a world class opera singer. So we've got the tragic like art figure thing going on there. And then obviously Norma, a deeply tragic figure. She has locked herself in her house, like locked. She just doesn't leave. um, she stays in her house, doesn't interact with anyone except for Max. Like, is all she wants is to be the star that she was before, and just can't grasp it. So we've both got these like deeply tragic figures, and then on top of that, there's the connection in Sunset Boulevard directly to Gothic stories with uh, Salome itself and Norma's script. I mean, the story of Salome, at least the Strauss opera, there's like a bajillion versions, but the most well known one, the Strauss opera, Salome is a princess. She's isolated in her castle because her father is overly protective of her in like a gross sexual manner. Um, it's really weird. It's a bizarre opera, but she's trapped in the castle. Her pervy dad wants her, and all she wants is this holy man that she can't have. And she creates this delusion and goes mad in her head with love and beheads him in the end and literally holds his head on a silver platter. Like, that's That's the opera. So a ton of gothic elements just in that connection alone, and then obviously Sunset Boulevard is mirroring the plot of Salome. So we've got that.
It's more like Norma is mirroring the plot because she's
Yeah.
Right.
so she's in her delusion that she's part of the shooting of this film by the end. Like she thinks DeMille is there, but it might go further when she might actually start to think that she is Salome as she goes
Right.
further into her delusion. And because at this point she is so broken and
Yeah. Just barely a person. And you could
Yeah.
see that with like
A shell.
yeah, she like gets like an insane amount of like procedures. We don't really know what they are, but like she goes through something to like go out into the world and like get her return. So she's got this fear of like being perceived incorrectly or just the outside world maybe, which is connecting into Gaslight with the isolation with Gregory deciding, Paula, you got to stay in this house. You're taking pictures off the wall and then forgetting it. It's pretty weird. Now you're a klepto. It's so it's just like this deep delusion created by isolation of artistic figures, and I think also both films are trying to make this connection between art and sanity or insanity. It's definitely more prevalent in with Norma than in Gaslight, but I still think it's there in Gaslight. I mean, Paula is trapped in the house. She can't be the opera singer she wants to be. She can't. She literally can't leave to do any of it.
Yeah. I think the key kind of difference here is that in Gaslight, you kind of have the woman isolated and trapped in the house as a way to create a false delusion.
Right.
And then in Sunset Boulevard, you have a woman isolated in the house because she's trying to maintain a delusion that can only exist contained inside that house.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, also, Paula gets out of the delusion in the end,
Mm-hmm.
whereas
Yeah.
Norma is trapped in it.
Yeah, because it's of her own making. Like she
Yeah.
can't escape from herself, and she
she
never
has the power.
And yeah, she's got. I mean, she's a rich lady.
Right.
Like she can, like, until she gets, until the end, she can afford to, live out her life in the exact inauthentic way that she wants to.
Right.
Whereas
Happy
Paula
for
is
her.
desperately trying to escape.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Norma is using her high class status to her own detriment, whereas Paula is being kept away from that status.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
being literally stolen from, and yeah.
Yeah.
Literally stolen from, and it's fair. So, like we can see, I mean, obviously, the original Gothic in Gaslight and the original stories, and they were really, really impactful on the future noir. And so Billy Wilder obviously had a lot of influence from that. He took that, not a ton, just a little dollop of influence and a little dollop of impactfulness.
Mhm.
He put that
But you
in
can
his
see,
film.
you can clearly see the impact.
It is clear. It's a dollop that spreads, like a
across
drop
the
of paint,
tarmac.
Right.
across the tarmac, like a drop of paint on a smock. It spreads and it's very impactful and it very shines through.
Has a good mouthfeel.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Very good mouthfeel.
Impactful mouthfeel.
A very impactful mouthfeel.
Mouthfeel for my life, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the songs on the album.
Yes,
That's the
impactful mouthfeel.
first song. Yeah, that's gonna be the hit.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Impactful mouthfeel.
coming soon.
Yeah.
And
Keep your ears peeled.
and get your ears pierced.
Yeah.
I do both, honestly.
Just do both. And so once again, we have been very impactful people, impacting you with our impactfulness. just a small dollop, not a huge smock or tarmac or a mouthfeel, just all those words. And we hope to impact you next time. Have a very impactful life. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.